Summer is coming. We've had a taste of that summer weather, and the calendar is ticking by. We celebrated our graduates last week, and graduation is one of those things that reminds us that, well, for some people, this month of May is an obvious time for reevaluation and decision making. But even outside of academics, it may also be a time of rethinking and a time of planning. I know for families with children, you're probably finishing up those plans for what the kids are going to do this summer, where there'll be camps or daycare or lots of family visits. Some are asking what kind of vacation is possible this year. Where could we go? Will we be visiting family or meeting with friends? And for those working in jobs, sometimes this is a time of changing jobs, of getting transferred or getting promotions or just deciding to try something new. It's often a time for moving to a new location. But whatever the situation, change tends to make us uncomfortable. And I think we all experience a little bit of that FOMO, that fear of missing out. We want to know that we're on the right track. We wonder, does God have a plan for my life that I should be finding and I should be following it? I personally think God has, for each of our lives, a plan that we live our lives loving one another and caring for others and for creation. But what that means specifically, well, what that looks like, it's going to keep changing. It will require some openness, some planning, and some letting go of plans. But I find it encouraging to know that it's not just me, it's not just you. It's always been difficult to figure out what to do with this wonderful life over the lifetime and day by day and week by week. Where is God leading? Am I using my gift? Am I filling my potential? Making decisions, it's never really easy. Especially the big ones can be nerve-wracking. I find myself saying, I'm driving myself crazy worrying about what to do, what decision to make. And I think maybe that's a way of acknowledging that, well, I tend to increase my own level of anxiety by stressing over the choices that are in front of me. But it really does help to know that I'm not alone. And the stories in our scripture invite us into the lives of people who are struggling with the same issues and the same difficult choices. So in the scriptures that we read this morning, in our story from Acts, it starts with, one way of making decisions. We're told during the night Paul had a vision. That's something that seems to happen a lot in scriptures. I don't think so much for us, and maybe at least not in visions that seem so clear or so sure. This particular vision comes, though, as a part of a long process of seeking the best plan. Because Paul has already been on the road for some time. He's traveling with a group of friends. He's traveling with Timothy and Silas, and they've already been through what is now modern-day Turkey and Greece. They've been to Cyprus and Syria. They've been sharing their experience of faith with people in the small towns, in between the big cities, and starting house churches with people of all kinds of backgrounds. And they have had to come back to the church in Jerusalem. They've had to work out some of their differences with that original Jewish Christian church. And it took some long hours of conversation and debate and sharing their thoughts on what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. What was it going to mean in the future to be a Christian? Together, they were trying to discern God's intention. And they finally come to an agreement that they would let go of those requirements of Judaism that were so strict. And this would mean that people could come from all places. Gentiles, Asians, Africans, and Westerners could come into their relationship with God through Christ in their own way as they experience the Spirit leading them. So this is wonderful change and a sense of direction, and now they're deciding where to go next. It's time to start another road trip. Timothy and Silas and our narrator of the story are on board with Paul. They just don't know where to go. We might say they were listening for the Spirit to lead, but that sort of limits our senses. Do we hear the Spirit speaking? Do we feel it in our gut? Do we have a vision as to where God is leading us? I can't say I've ever had a vision, and I rarely remember my dreams, so that has never helped me very much. But sometimes I do have a gut feeling. Just that feeling that something is right. I follow my intuition, and I usually regret it if I don't. But all of these paths to decision-making seem to have been true for Paul and his friends. We were told they are forbidden by the Spirit to speak in Asia, but we don't know if someone heard a voice or they just knew this in their gut, that was the wrong way for them to go. Finally, there's a sense of clarity. During the night, Paul has a vision. Might have been a dream while he was sleeping. It might have been a strong mental picture while he was praying. But finally, he knew there was someone in Macedonia that needed what they had to offer. Now, we have one more good clue to decision-making in this story. Paul had this vision, but the next verse uses the pronoun we. We decided what it meant to do. The perspective of the story changes from he to we. The vision needs to be interpreted. And that task doesn't belong just to one person alone. The community is involved in discerning that this is God's call, not just to an individual, but to all of us together. And I think this is true for us in our time as well. We need community. We need to bounce our ideas off of other people in our lives, the people who care about us and the people whose lives will be affected by the choices that we make. And then once we're able to make that decision and choose that path, then we need to hold that decision very lightly. We need to make plans while not obsessing on the details or expecting that everything is going to go just as planned, because it rarely does. For example, in our story, again, Paul's vision had involved a Macedonian man calling them for help. But the first person to welcome them when they arrive in Macedonia and Philippi was a woman. Lydia is a strong, independent woman. She is a dealer of purple cloth, which suggests she's a successful entrepreneur. Even of more significance is the fact that she is a leader of a household. And in this time, when male domination permeated every part of the culture, it seems significant that Luke, writing out this story, would include this powerful, financially secure woman. Lydia seems to be representative of the role that women played in the early movement that followed Jesus. She shows autonomy and agency and advocacy for others. Lydia represents the independent women who also continued to be key supporters of the early church. Lydia continued to support this movement after this initial encounter that we have seen in the story today. We find later in Acts that after Paul and some of the other leaders have been arrested and beaten and imprisoned, they will return to Lydia's house for respite and care. I know I'm going on a bit about Lydia, but she's an important figure that we don't often hear about. But in this encounter today that we read about, she is already listening to the Spirit, even before she has heard about Christ. She was intrigued by the Jewish understanding of God. She was learning, but on the outside, listening in. And on that day, she's outside of the city, by the river, in that place where daily life takes place, where the water is drawn to dye the cloth that she will sell in the market. This is where women came to wash their clothes, where people came to pray in the midst of their day. This is where Paul and his friends chose to stop for some water and for some conversation. And Lydia and Paul find that they had common interest in her hometown, common interest in seeking God. So when Paul shares his story of how God has changed his life and led him to this place, Lydia is already in that decision-making process as well. She's looking for something that will take her life in a new direction. And one intriguing aspect of this message that Paul is sharing is that Jesus was unjustly executed by human judicial process. And yet God responds to this injustice by raising Jesus from the dead. That ultimate act of God, whom Paul is sharing, was God's response to injustice with resurrection. And Lydia is intrigued, and her faith becomes active. She decides that she will be baptized, and she brings in her household, and she opens her home. And in this one encounter, social and cultural boundaries have crumbled. This one corner of the world is beginning to be changed by God's grace in a way they couldn't have planned, they could not foresee. So we might call this serendipitous. We might call it coincidence or providence. There was no way that they would have known who would be there at the river that day. But while waiting with open hearts and open minds, Paul had a hunch, and he felt a sense of peace, and he followed that vision, that intuition, maybe making some educated guesses on how to get there and what might be the first place to start. And then something amazing fell into place. Paul and his friends carefully thought, making their plans. They were open to the unexpected at the same time. They were open to the surprises and the detours that might come along the way. Jess Cook describes her experience for us today of making plans in these lingering pandemic days, when she says, I find my own vision to be expanding to see the world that is possible beyond the chaos of the present moment. It's only when I step away from the chaos of the world that I am able to connect with a deeper wisdom that awaits. And as I learn to be still and listen rather than looking for what I'm supposed to do, I am much more attuned to the rhythm of the world around me and to the movement of the Spirit beneath it all. I think it might help us to think of our plans as a sketch rather than a portrait. Making plans is an outline rather than a manuscript. For your book can never be written until after the fact, because life will always include the unexpected, the unforeseeable forks in the road. I think last week we had the image of the headlights of a car was as far as we could see. And Laura Vanderkam suggests that life in an uncertain world is kind of like walking on a trail in the dark woods, shining a flashlight. We can see the next few weeks pretty well, but past that, there's a lot of shadows. But it's okay to still be excited about what's around the bend. All of that will come into light eventually, especially if we keep shining that light forward and moving forward. So we will keep making plans, and we will hold them lightly. And we will go with the flow, whatever happens. And we will do it together, knowing that the Spirit of God is with us and guiding us, even when we cannot see our way. So we will plan together, and now let us sing together.